Ladies and gentlemen, Kemenkeu Learning Week Day 3 is about to begin. But before that, let me take a moment to review some technical details. First, to help us recognize you, please rename your ID with the format unit_name. Second, to reduce noise and to prevent any sound issues, please mute your audio, but kindly activate your video if possible. We're also looking forward to your feedback about this webinar, so please fill out the evaluation form at the end of this event. Only those who join this webinar until the end and fill the evaluation form are eligible to get the e-certificate. Today's webinar will be conducted in English. However, it comes with English-Indonesian simultaneous interpretation. To listen to the translation, click the globe icon or three dots icon, select interpretation, and choose English or Indonesian accordingly. It is advised that you do not click the mute original audio, but should you wish to do so to obtain a clearer audio rendition, please make sure to manually switch off the interpretation when someone on the floor is speaking in the language that you're listening to. This webinar is also available on our YouTube channel, BPPK Kemenkeu. That's all the information. Let's now begin Kemenkeu Learning Week Day 3, Inclusive Learning for People with Disabilities. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome back to Kemenkeu Learning Week Day 3 with the topic of inclusive learning for people with disabilities. First of all, let me express my gratitude to the Almighty God for allowing us to participate in this webinar. Also, a very warm welcome to the Director of General Finance Training Center, Ibu Heni Kartikawati, honorable senior officials from the Ministry of Finance and other ministries or agencies of Indonesia, our special guest speaker, Christine Hoffman, and our moderator, Lily Mutiari. I'm Yudi Dwi Prasanto, the MC for this event. On behalf of the organizing committee, we extend our appreciation for each and every one of you. We're very grateful for the enthusiasm of the participants ever since the day one of Kemenkeu Learning Week 2023. Well, ladies and gentlemen, to officially open this webinar, please welcome the Director of General Finance Training Center, Ibu Heni Kartikawati, to deliver the opening remarks. Ibu Heni, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Mas Yudi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the third day of the Ministry of Finance Learning Week 2023. First of all, I'd like to extend my warm greetings to honorable senior officials from the Ministry of Finance and other ministries or agencies. Our speaker, Ms. Christine Hoffman, our moderator, Mbak Lily Mutiari, and distinguished participants. Ladies and gentlemen, learning is a fundamental process of life, essential for personal growth and development, career advancement, and improving social skills. It's not limited or exclusive to any group. There is a growing awareness of the importance of ensuring equal access to learning systems, both on a global and national scale. Therefore, we must support the effort to spread learning opportunities widely by having an inclusive learning system. Inclusive learning has become a central focus, yet a significant challenge for educational systems around the world. Inclusive learning is designed to ensure that learners with diverse needs and preferences have equal access to learning resources, services, and experiences. Inclusive learning is expected to work to reduce inequalities and enhance the competencies of all individuals, regardless of their diverse needs and preferences. Through inclusive learning, we aim to further stimulate innovation and human productivity. The success of inclusive learning relies heavily on the learning environment. A conducive learning environment is the key to inclusive learning process. To do so, it must prioritize inclusivity and reflect the diversity of learning activities. Facilitators and systems are important, yet all of us as learners also play a vital role in creating an inclusive learning environment. By actively engaging and contributing to the environment, we can help ensure the success of an inclusive learning environment. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have Christine Hoffman as our speaker today. We look forward to hearing her thoughts and strategies in creating an inclusive learning environment. I believe this session will teach us valuable insights and inspire us to learn on establishing an inclusive learning system for people with disabilities. Lastly, I wish all participants a meaningful learning. I wish all participants a meaningful learning session today. Please gain as much knowledge as possible from this session, and then share it with your colleagues to help accelerate the knowledge sharing culture in our institution as a learning organization befitting our ministry. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Ibu Heni Kartikawati, for the opening remarks. Well, ladies and gentlemen, proceeding to the main agenda today, it's truly an honor to have Christine Hoffman with us today. Before starting our session with Christine, let me introduce our moderator, Lily Mutiari. Lily is a final year doctor in education candidate from the National Institute of Education, NIE, Nanyang Technological University, NTU, Singapore. She has a dual master's in economics from Gajah Mada University and Georgia State University in the US. She's been working in the Ministry of Finance since graduating from STAN in 2006. Lily enjoys community services and thus was serving as the president of the NIE Graduate Students Club in 2021, and until recently as the General Secretary of the NTU Graduate Students Associations. Well, we've got Lily on the screen here. How are you, Lily?
Hi, Yudi. How are you? Good. I'm great.
I'm great as well. I'm so excited for the upcoming session with you and Christine,
Me
of course.
too.
So please, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Yudi, for such a warm introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be here, joining live from the lovely eastern part of Indonesia, where I'd love to welcome our honorable speaker, guests, and audience who join us today, either in the Zoom meeting or by streaming live on our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Our today's topic is inclusive learning for people with disabilities. We're choosing that particular topic since inclusivity is essential in our learning environment. We need to provide learning equity to ensure that everyone has access to learning, which may also empower people with disabilities. So I'd like to invite you, members of our audience, to join me in learning how we can make that happen. And I'm more than delighted to introduce our honorable speaker, Christine Hoffman. Christine works as the team lead on skills for social inclusion in the International Labour Organizations, or ILO, Skills and Employability Branch in Geneva. She leads research and knowledge products and builds capacity on skills and lifelong learning approaches that include persons with disabilities, informal economy workers, migrant workers, forcibly displaced people, LGBTI people, and other vulnerable groups, including in fragile contexts. She supports ILO constituents in making skills development and recognition systems more inclusive and works with the ILO's networks on skills specialists around the world. Christine publishes papers, articles, guides, and policy briefs, including the ILO's Making Technical and Vocational Education and Training, or TFAT, and Skills Development Inclusive for All Guide, the ILO Skills for Green Jobs book, the Resource Guide on Upgrading Informal Apprenticeship in Africa, and the Guide on Promoting Social Cohesion and Peaceful Coexistence through TFAT, among others. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Christine Hoffman. Hi, Christine. How are you?
Good afternoon. Good morning. Thank you, Lily, for this very kind introduction. So I greet all of you from Geneva, where I'm based, and a warm thank you, really, for this invite. It's a great pleasure to contribute to your learning festival.
The pleasure is all ours.
So I brought a couple of slides. Would you like me to?
Yes, I believe you'll start with a brief presentation. Yes. So we'll share the slides and you can start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The screen is yours.
Thank you. Let me also start by saying that this topic of inclusive learning is very, very dear to my heart. So I'm not only a team lead on this topic in the International Labour Organization, but I grew up in a family of teachers. So learning has always been around me. And I actually also grew up as a daughter of a teacher with a disability. So my father had polio when he was a boy. So he was living with a disability and teaching as a teacher with a disability throughout his career. Yet, I'm not talking to you about my personal experience, but about my professional experience and about the work of the ILO. So why is the ILO working on disability inclusion? The ILO is a UN organization that was founded 100 years ago to set minimum social standards around the world. And we are both a normative organization to set these standards, but we're also a development organization to help countries, governments, workers, and employers to implement these standards. And because we're the Organization for the World of Work and learning, skills development and training is very important for the world of work, we promote inclusive learning for all. Yes, I was just wondering whether you can see the screen. Wonderful. Thank you. So the Sustainable Development Goals, as many of you will know, talk about work, and they also talk about education and learning. And they specifically talk about inclusive education and learning in some of those Sustainable Development Goals, 4.5 and 8.5. I've put them here for you. But discrimination or non-discrimination and equality is also a fundamental principle and right at work. And the ILO promotes 5 fundamental principles and rights at work: no child labor, no forced labor, freedom of association, collective bargaining, occupational safety and health at work, and equality and non-discrimination. So it's really the bread and butter of our organization. Next slide, please. And the ILO was the first organization in 1983 that developed an international labor standard. The convention, you can read here, on vocational rehabilitation and employment, that targeted specifically people with disabilities. And it called for access to all and the development of vocational rehabilitation and employment services as well for people with disabilities. Now, in 2006, I would say a revolution happened with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, because we saw a shift in thinking. And why was that? It was because a lot of organizations of persons with disabilities actually participated in the process of designing this convention. And so in this convention, we reinstate this core principle that rights and dignities are there for all people. We need no discrimination, full and effective participation, and you have specific chapters in the UN Convention that is much broader than only talking about the world of work and education, but you do have specific chapters on education, work, and employment. And here we are not talking about vocational rehabilitation and specific services only, but we're talking about inclusive systems, about inclusive learning and inclusive worlds of work. Next slide, please. And so what has shifted actually is an understanding and a perception of what disability is. In the earlier days, disability was very often seen as an impairment, as a medical problem that needed a medical solution. Whereas starting in 2006 with a convention, I mean, the thinking was around way before, but it was embedded within an international instrument in 2006, was what we call social model. So the recognition that the impairment is not the problem. The problem is the barriers that society sets, that systems set, and that prevent the full participation of persons with disabilities in learning, in training, in work, in all areas of society. And so we're focusing on making systems inclusive. Next slide, please. So we have published a guide that is available on our website. It speaks about technical vocational education and training, since this is the branch and the technical area I work in. Yet this, the logic here and the flow you can see also applies to professional development. So upskilling programs on the job. So that's why I'm presenting this flow to you, because in all sorts of trainings, you have the issue of access and choice of programs. You have the issue of attendance and making participation inclusive. You have the issue of assessment and certification. And then, depending on whether you're already employed or not, you have the issue of transitioning to work. And when we look at training systems around the world, the dropout of persons with disabilities is higher in all these phases, no matter where you are. And why is this? Because systems are not fully inclusive, and there are still barriers at all these different stages that we need to identify and then overcome. Next slide, please. So you just have a couple of possible solutions, but we'll be talking about those, the learning methodologies, the inclusive learning environments, and we'll also be talking about technology later on. Next slide, please. So before moving into some questions and answers, I wanted to share with you, and I hope some of you might already be aware of this, a very powerful network the ILO has supported, and it's a network of companies around the world. We call it the Global Business and Disability Network, to promote the inclusion of persons with disabilities in employment, but definitely also in learning and professional development within these companies. And so there's a website, you find a lot of resources and a very interesting self-assessment tool. You find the 10 principles that all companies that are part of this network sort of promise to follow. And in addition to 38 global multinational enterprises that are part of it, we have supported national charters in now 38 countries. And I understand that Indonesia also has a national charter of a business and disability network. So what this network does is it provides a learning space for companies to exchange practices on what works for inclusion within their company, with their employees, and with their learning systems they have set up. Thank you, and I look forward to discussing with you.
Thank you, Kristen. It's a very insightful, brief, yet lots of things to learn about from about inclusive learning for people with disabilities. So as we wait for questions coming in from our audience, I'd like to start with one of our prepared questions. But before that, let me remind the audience that you may ask your question at any time by typing them into the Zoom or YouTube chat boxes, or by clicking the raise hand button on Zoom, and I will call your name. So I'm interested to your point about that disability is no longer seen as the disabled people or whatever the barrier has by the people, but instead of more of the system itself that should be providing equity for everyone to have access to learning. Am I right in having that understanding? Yes. So how do you think we can implement that to our context of learning in the Ministry of Finance?
Thanks for the question. This is really a fundamental shift in thinking. So it's the context that disables people. It's not the person that's the problem. It's the context. And so we need to understand what the different barriers are. So we need to think about what the potential barriers could be in order for our learning environment to become universally accessible. So we have these universal design principles that can help us think about those different potential barriers. And some of these universal design principles are equitable use, flexibility in use. So think about where particular rules might constrain certain people. It's about making use simple and intuitive, because like that, it becomes easier to use for everyone. Make information available through multiple channels. Give a tolerance for error. And try to think about low physical efforts in all your designs. So I think with these big universal design principles, and you can find more, but with these, it's already a very good start. And then, in addition to those universal design principles, you create inclusive learning environments if you address individual barriers by talking to individuals and finding out what their particular issue is. So you always need to do both.
Okay, that is interesting. So there are essentially three main things that we'd like to learn about the inclusive learning and about creating, and you've mentioned some of them, about ensuring the inclusive learning model and about the learning technologies, because as we can see, now we're doing an online session, lots of learning has been transformed into an online environment. So do you think that actually create wider access, including for people with disabilities, or do you think we should be more careful in creating inclusive learning online?
Well, I think there's a lot to say about technology, what technology can do, and where technology might also pose an additional barrier. But let me start by talking again about how these specific measures can work, because technology can help overcome some of those barriers, and that's what we need to where we need to get at, right? So for this individual measures, we usually call it reasonable adjustment or reasonable accommodation. You have a lot of technological solutions, but you also have a lot of very easy solutions that you will get to when you talk to people. Just to give you a very random example, if we talk about short people and they need to be getting to the top floor in a skyscraper, well, the issue might be that the buttons in the elevator are so high up that the person doesn't reach them.
Right.
So now, is a technology solution to redesign the elevator and to lower all those buttons? Well, that would come at a very high cost. Well, the very easy solution is you attach a stick inside your elevator so that anyone who doesn't reach the button high up just uses the stick, you know? So that's a technological solution, a very simple one, but it's one that will help overcome that systemic problem of the button being too high up.
That's interesting.
There are many more examples of that. So we also need to change our thinking.
Yes.
That we need very complicated and high level and expensive technological solutions. Often we don't.
Yes, that's interesting, and it's interesting to learn that we actually need to change our mindset and actually seek for simplicity instead of complexity with technology to actually help provide inclusive environment. Let's hold our thoughts on that, because we have a member of the audience raising her hand and wanting to ask a question. Let me call upon Linda. Miss Linda, can you unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question, please? I think Linda is still muted. Yes, we can't hear you. Is it from the host or? Linda, can you try to speak again? Yes, we can hear you now, please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Linda from BPD PKS. Please, thank you for invite me to join this Zoom. Actually, I just want to ask on the floor that how about Montessori method for inclusive people? As we know that Miss Hoffman at ILO maybe ever handle kids with disabilities and maybe have experience with this method. Maybe you can share to us about Montessori method. Thank you. Sorry, my English is not good.
No, you're doing great. Christine, please go ahead and answer.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. Montessori is a very particular pedagogical methodology. And it puts emphasis as well on the individual development. So I think from that perspective, it's already a very powerful methodology to try and address individual accessibility issues that people with disabilities might face. Yet you can apply a lot of the general principles of using universal design and of using reasonable adjustment also with other types of pedagogy. So you don't necessarily need Montessori for that. It's just one of the different alternative pedagogies that have their value.
Right. Thank you for the question, Linda. And we also have a member of the audience asking through our chat box from Pujian Nauli. I'm going to read the question to you. I wonder how to measure the success of inclusive education programs and what are the outcomes that we should be looking for? So how to measure the success? Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, I would ask back, how do you measure success of any learning? So what we want to achieve by being inclusive is that we offer the same services and the same quality to everyone. And we want to make sure that our services are designed in a way that everyone can participate in the same way and can be successful in the same way. And so we don't need to measure differently. We just need to be aware in our measurement that we capture whether we have people with disabilities included and that these people do not face barriers. So hence, if we have a very low participation rate, there might be issues. If you have a higher dropout rate, there might be issues. If you have people not accessing their certificates because of complicated technological solutions being put in place, there's an issue. So it's important to disaggregate your data, but the type of measurement and the type of results you are measuring, whether people are actually then using the skills they've learned, whether they might have a career advancement because of the training, they earn more, all of these measures you should apply to everyone.
Okay. As we wait for more questions from the audience, how about we dive deeper into building an inclusive learning environment? So how to build one? And maybe we start from that. How do you actually build one?
Well, I think you start with an accessibility assessment in a way. So you look at physical, informational, service accessibility in a general way. And you try to walk and work towards an inclusive, universal design. Then you look at your admission procedures. Are you asking disability-specific questions to people? Do you have a focal person that can be addressed if a person needs individual, reasonable adjustment? And then if you have that in place, and this person still needs additional support, you then look for further support and a network of organizations, service providers, of tools that can help with that individual reasonable adjustment. What some companies have done is they have set up so-called employee resource groups that have experience, either because they have a disability themselves or because they have a family member with a disability. And then they can support this focal person. And then, very importantly, when now we talk about an inclusive learning environment, it's about creating awareness and building capacity of people, of how to be disability inclusive in your behavior. disability etiquette is a very important knowledge and skill to train on. And I mean, just to give you an example as well from the ILO context, we have a colleague with visual impairment, and she walks with a stick, and she manages. She has a screen reader, and has been with the ILO for a long time. Then a new colleague with a visual impairment came, and HR thought, well, it might be helpful to ask this other colleague, sort of to help her. Now, the issue was that the new colleague was not walking with a stick; she had a dog,
Right,
to help her, and so the other colleague had no clue how to help her because it was a very different situation. No? So our human resource people assumed that because she was visually impaired, she'd be able to help. But because she uses a different type of reasonable adjustment than the new colleague who has a dog, she couldn't help. So then we needed to find, someone who could help with that situation. But in the end, I think what our colleagues also simply learned is that by walking through the building, going through the different tools she needs to use, etc., they found a solution. So the solution is always there. You just need to talk to people.
right. And you mentioned about the accessibility assessment. Like, I believe with any assessment, it's hard to actually make it comprehensive enough that you can cover all bases, right? So does that mean, before we go on to a question from our audience, does that mean that you kind of have to go with reactive process to whatever it comes on the field, or how do you do that?
Well, I think there are those two steps, no? There is the general accessibility that also relates to your websites. There are standards of how you can make websites more accessible. Simple things, if you have graphs, you include a description of what it is. You have options to increase the font, all these kind of things, only for websites. So that's the basic. Sometimes that already needs quite some work, but you only need to do that once. So if you get your main services, information, etc., accessible, that should be good enough. And then you need to put in place the mechanisms and the processes that will help an individual overcome the adjustment barriers that he or she might face. So, for example, there is a list that the WHO has issued with the 50 most common disability-specific assistive technologies for daily life. And so that's available publicly. Very happy as well to share the link. But then there might also be technologies that are more relevant for the learning context. And so just to mention some of them, since you asked for technology early on. So you have voice-activated assistants like Alex, there's Google Home, Siri, Bing, certain
even Microsoft Forms offers that nowadays.
Exactly. That can be very handy for learning, and in particular for visually impaired. But those screen readers as well are very common and are used by a lot of people. So Then you can have language caption for hearing impaired. You can have in trainings, if you have recorded modules, you can have the possibility to replay, to pause, to play it slow mode. Maybe also to have background music for some calm environment for people who might easily feel stressed. And you can have very simple adjustments as well for physical disabilities. With wide chairs, with adjustable tables. And then there's also sort of the newer generation of technologies with virtual reality or augmented reality to train on specific, virtual reality has great tools to train on soft skills. But there might actually also be very nice VR ways to train on disability etiquette. And to train what I very recently read is that people with autistic syndromes can be assisted as well with some artificial intelligence devices that help them train some social behaviors, overcome certain social interaction barriers. So a lot of things are possible with technology. Let alone 3D printing for artificial limbs, which is also a big area where, let's say, the technological devices for daily life support is really skyrocketing.
Right, and it's interesting that you mentioned about the etiquette for inclusive learning for disabilities. But before we continue on that, let's address a question coming in from the chat box from Putri Amalia. What are the challenges in implementing inclusive education programs? What do you think the challenges are?
Oh, I think there are still many.
Right. You also mentioned a few of them, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But the first and probably the biggest one is a lack of awareness and a fear of not knowing what to do and whether to do it right. And so there's an artificial barrier in a way of not daring to reach out, because solutions are there and are very easy to find if you talk to the concerned people. So it's all about being open, listening to what is needed and where the barriers are, and to get people with disabilities heard. When we look at the last big World Disability Report that the World Health Organization published, 15% of the world's population have a disability. So this is a broad understanding of disability, and it includes temporary disability. It includes all sorts of mental health issues, depression, stress, but it also includes neurodiversity. So issues like dyslexia, dyscalculia, several other issues that we encounter and then many people have, and they might not say it's a disability. But if we open our understanding and we look at all possible barriers that we need to address, we will lower our personal barriers to think, oh, this is so complicated and I will not find a solution. Actually, it's not difficult to find a solution. And there are a lot of myths about disability that we need to address. And the Business and Disability Network also has some very nice myths and facts on the website that I invite you to look at. And so one of the myths is that reasonable adjustment for persons with disabilities is very costly. And actually, a study has shown that 65% of reasonable adjustments do not cost anything.
I see.
So those are some of the barriers in our own thinking we need to overcome.
Right. Yeah. So that's interesting and makes me want to ask you about you mentioned about the disability etiquette and how it is important. And you mentioned early on that we need to identify different disabilities and try to address them. How do you do that? Because it's like a sensitive issues, I guess we sort of tend to see it that way. Should I ask the question? Should I not ask the question? If I ask the question, how do you typically ask the question? How do you ask the question that makes people willing to actually identify themselves and describe themselves, right? Or is there also chances that people might not know what disabilities they might have? How is it in the field? Like, what's your experience about that?
Yes, indeed, this is very, very important. And there's been a lot of discussion globally about how to identify disability. So there is a so-called Washington questions, or that's how they are often referred to. So there are 6 questions that are asked as well in labor force surveys that help identify whether people might have a disability. And those questions are phrased in the way, do you have difficulties when reading and accessing information, when hearing? So that's the type of question within surveys that is being asked.
And sounds quite general, right?
It is very general, absolutely.
Yes.
But then you have the specific self-identification questions in any sort of admission documents, or when you organize a meeting. It's good to have a question. Do you require some specific support? Because that's what people would need to tell you if they think they need support. If they don't think they need support because they have managed to get along, then that's fine. Then you don't need to worry. And I think a very important dimension as well of disability etiquette is that you don't assume that
right. I think that's important.
Exactly, needs something. Let the person come forth. But then if you see, there's a blind person in front of an elevator and there are lots of people or whatever, you can ask and offer, would you prefer, can I offer you my arm to guide you, rather than just, touching the person and pulling him or her, which would definitely be perceived as an intrusion, as an offense, maybe.
Okay.
So it's just about being human, showing respect.
Yes.
And treating people as you want to be treated.
Yeah, and I agree. And now I know the purpose of those questions because I've had it as well in some forms that are filled in. It sounds very general. Okay, so before we go deeper into that, there's also a question from our audience from the YouTube chat box. Tarasia Suganda, thank you for your question. Inclusive learning is a lifelong journey. What are the best practices to maintain the motivation on inclusive learning in our organization in order not to be sidetracked? What do you think about that?
I think this is very true. And it's not just organizations, it's also societies that need to learn, because for many decades in many countries, we have either locked people with disabilities away or have provided segregated solutions. And this is not inclusion. So what we need to get to is to make our services inclusive so that everyone can participate. And whether you have found the right solution, you will only be able to tell if you talk to people and you find out whether they have been able to fully participate and whether they've been able to thrive with the learning. And a very important dimension as well is in learning, in all learning, is that we learn from each other when we ask and when we continuously challenge our own thinking and our own ways of doing things. One solution might work for one person, but not for the next. So keep asking, keep discussing, keep finding out what works.
That's a great answer, Christine. Thank you so much. And related to that question about maintaining motivation, you mentioned earlier that in your institution, there's a worker with certain disabilities, which work for a certain period of time and then leave the corporation. But then do you keep the support or whatever tools you've been using to support to provide an inclusive environment for our employees in place in order to have it ready and available for anyone to access that? Or what's the strategy actually to maintain this inclusive learning environment?
Yeah, I think the focal people and also this employee resource group are very important. It's also very important to have principles and policies within an organization that keep reminding people of the inclusive nature of the organization, of the learning, of the working environment that we want to maintain. Because we also tend to get back to our old routines. So it's good to be reminded of policies. It's good that the directors keep reminding us of this. And then there's another dimension I haven't mentioned, and it's generally something we as ILO, when we work with governments, we would lobby for. I'm not sure what the situation is in Indonesia, but generally for workplace adjustments, for those cases where you do need some funds, this is where we would advocate for a government fund to be there to cover some of the costs for reasonable adjustment that go beyond the capacity of the organization to cater for that.
Okay.
So just as a general message.
Yes, of course. And you mentioned earlier about talking to the person, identify the disabilities as to provide individual solutions. But we talked earlier about having online programs, about delivering our training online as well, which, for example, as the Zoom meeting, we are having around 200 audience by far joining in Zoom only and more on YouTube. But it's a little bit harder to actually identify the barriers that people might have individually. What's your strategy in having an inclusive learning environment for wider online programs?
Well, I think there are a number of things for online programs. Already there's the language, and I think you're addressing it by providing interpretation into Bahasa. So that's already one accessibility solution. It's good to also have the option to do captions so that people can read subtitles, might have issues with hearing. It's good to record so that people can go back to it afterwards. There is on YouTube as well the possibility to listen to something either faster or slower. So like that, you can adjust to the person's preference. And then, I mean, I think in every learning, it's good to be able to be interactive and to give people the chance to voice their concerns in the chat, to say, sorry, I did not understand that. Can you please repeat? And to give the possibility for people to interact in smaller groups. All that is possible through technology. So make use of that when you do online learnings. Try to get people together. It's good to have some written chats and discussions. But again, that might give preference to people who like writing, reading. Others might prefer voice and direct interaction. And others, again, might prefer images. So it's also good in your online learning to use all types of senses. I mean, probably smelling might be difficult, but at least visual, hearing.
Yes,
reading.
at least we try to provide it. I think that's what's important, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so there's a question from the chat box from Sri Rahayu. There's a different situation on education for disabilities between Indonesia and Australia. In Indonesia, we have a small number of special schools for disabilities, but in Australia, the disabled people are being sent to the regular school. Which one do you think is better, and what's the benefit of between these two practices? Christine.
Yes, thanks for the question. Well, this actually goes back to what the UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities called for. They called for inclusive education, meaning to move the specialized education schools to become support services for general schools that are inclusive. And that's what a lot of countries are trying. There might still be some cases of multiple disabilities where people are not able to be mainstreamed into general education. But many of the learners that have for many years been sent to specialized education would be able to enjoy general education. And the big advantage of that is that they actually get the same types of certificates and the same types of qualifications at the end, and not a second-class certificate. So it gives them much better chances for career progression in the labor market, but also exposes them to, learning
More
with everyone.
challenges. Right.
Yeah, but to an inclusive learning environment.
Right.
And it exposes people that are not disabled to learn dealing very normally and naturally with people with disabilities, and learning disability etiquette as they grow up. So in a way, it has a lot of different side benefits. It comes with much more individualized solutions. So you need support, individual support for some of those students that the schools will have to provide, but the schools can provide it in partnership with staff that formerly worked in those segregated and specialized schools.
Which one do you support more, or is that obvious?
Well, the UN Convention calls for inclusive schools. And I definitely think, and I mean, this is what inclusivity, non-discrimination, and equality calls for. We need to be as inclusive as we can. And if we see that for some people with multiple disabilities, it does not work, we have specialized solutions. Yeah, but we also have some specialized solutions that will need to continue, but in much smaller sizes than we used to have.
Right. Thank you for members of the audience who have been asking the questions by far. Keep them coming, either through the chat box or by clicking on the raise hand button. To follow up on that, so how do you think we can accommodate the appropriate learning model for people with disabilities?
Well, by rethinking the way we currently offer our training, and by reaching out to persons with disabilities. There are organizations of persons with disabilities in probably nearly every larger city in Indonesia, I'm sure, and talk to them and conduct those accessibility assessments together with them. And if you have people with disabilities already in your organization, do it with them. Build capacity among your own trainers, among everyone. You can have some general disability awareness training as well, offered to all staff. Because in the end, it's a switch in mindset. That's a big step, but a very important one, and it doesn't need a lot, but it needs reminding, and it needs some management decisions as well.
I believe our minds are switched already, and this is one of the beginnings of our journey towards providing more inclusive learning environment. You mentioned about digital accessibility, about training people. How do you do that? How do you go about having that for your institution?
Well, on accessible websites, there are a lot of standards, so you can just look out for them. There are even some seals and labels that have been offered. But I would assume actually that government has already a standard. So, which means that for any online enrollment procedures, etc., make them as easy and simple as possible. For any visuals, provide subtitles. There are a number of rules to respect when you build your website. How the font is adjustable, etc. As I said, that's the first very important step. And then you look at individuals and you ask what they need.
Okay, is there a specific training, maybe especially to the HR people, to those whose one of the jobs is to identify the disabilities. What do you think is necessary? What are the necessary characteristics that they need to have?
Well, I think there are a lot of different trainings out there, and many organizations offer them. The ILO has promoted what we call a disability equality training, which is a 2-day training targeted not at a specific professional group, but it tries to change attitudes by having a very participatory, but also very, very interactive and challenging way of trying to address general discourses and let people take different positions, put them into a wheelchair, into a situation where they face a barrier, and let them argue for their inclusion. So making people change perspective, exposing them to different situations very much helps, open minds and rethink your own ways of, your own attitudes in the end, your own ways of dealing with problems that might not be problems.
Right. I see there's some hands-on experiences that we can do to actually making people more aware of what are the possibilities for people with disabilities, right? Okay, so what are the strategies that can be used to engage or even attract learning for people with disabilities so that they would really be involved in the learning process itself? Is there any specific or, yeah?
Well, I think if you have reached at that stage and you are fully aware, well, you design your course involving people with disabilities, and bring them on board at the very beginning. So you can do that for some model standard course and have your trainers involved so that your trainers would learn and realize what some of the potential barriers could be. And then whenever you organize your training and you have persons with disabilities, with specific disabilities included, you just reassess with the person at the beginning what would be needed.
It seems
so
that
that's the strategy. Yeah.
Okay. It seems to me that it's also important for the trainers, for the educators to have the sensitivity or to have the awareness to actually identify the barriers that they might be having in the learning materials, for instance. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So, on the learning materials, one of the big messages in general education is try to use images that are inclusive. That holds true
Not so many words.
For gender sensitivity. You don't want to picture women only as being the care workers, but you also want to picture men being the care workers. And you also want to picture a person with a disability being a cook or being a driver or being a nurse. So that's very important. On the visuals, it's just to make sure that the visual is actually accessible if it's a person with a visual impairment.
Okay, so how does technology influence or provide a good impact actually in the learning process for learners with disabilities?
Technology can provide great solutions, as mentioned, the screen readers and the captions, etc. But when we introduce a mainstream technology for learning, we need to introduce it thinking about possible barriers that this technology could cause for people with disabilities. So not all technologies are by design inclusive. And so that's where we need to be aware as well and be cautious. But as soon as we involve people with disabilities in the selection as well of the technologies, in the testing of the technology, you'll find out whether they are inclusive or whether they pose additional barriers. And then you need to think, is that the right technology, or do I need to select another one?
Right. So we use them based on our needs basis, and then we review them whether they actually help. Right.
Exactly.
And these technologies, you mentioned some of them just now. Are they, in your experience, accessible as in free access, free to download and stuff like that? Or does it have, you also mentioned about having a funding. What's your experience on that?
Yeah. So several of those general ones, they're all available for free. If you look at the list, and let me just paste it, the link to the
Chat
document
box
in the chat exactly. So those are the standard assistive technologies, priority assistive products list. Now, there are many, and maybe not all of them need to be, provided by a training provider. But the ones for daily use, I mean, there's a lot of technologies and aids that people will use anyway. So when you think about the learning environment, you look at the learning technologies, and virtual reality, I mean, is one, and augmented reality is another one that is gaining traction. That definitely comes with a cost, but in certain contexts, in particular, I mean, virtual reality is also being used to train people on particular dangerous situations. Or the ILO, we've used it for inspection, so to train inspectors on ships of how to detect specific hazards, for example. So they are great, but you need to make sure that they are actually accessible. So a VR that creates a virtual reality through, one of those headsets is definitely not accessible to someone with a visual impairment.
Right. I see.
So you just need to be aware.
Okay. Yeah, and then I think you already mentioned this assistive technology and about providing large fonts, screen readers, language caption. But how about people with more of a mental health issue or neurodiversity? How do we look at that? How do we identify and provide the needs?
Mm-hmm. I mean, for neurodiversity, you also have a lot of programs that help people with dyslexia, dyscalculia. So you have even artificial intelligence programs that can help. But I mean, the very easy one for dyslexia, is in Word, where you have your autocorrect tool. So like that, people can spot, and so several of those tools are available already for free for anyone. There are more specific ones as well. When you talk about mental health issues that lead to to depression, stress, burnout at work, etc. I mean, they cannot be solved with technology. I mean, you could think about, as I said, about certain provisions where, you facilitate some music background, or simply give more time, or be flexible in when people can choose to do certain learnings. That applies as well to, work environment, not only to learning environments. But, technology also can't solve everything. We're human beings. We need human interaction, and we sometimes also need human help to solve some issues. But definitely, mental health is an important factor that helps us all in our well-being, but it can also cause disabilities in the work environment, an inclusive environment where people are, understood in their complexity as a human being, with all our ups and downs and our personal challenges or personal traits and strengths. This will help. This will help avoid mental health issues. It will help have a culture where people can learn from each other and work well with each other.
That's interesting that you mentioned about having flexible learning, flexible time, maybe even chunking the materials as in smaller, bite-sized, easy to digest and absorb, right? And it makes it easier for all of us, really. But then some of the issues that we're probably facing at work is that we've been having demands on productivity. We need to finish this at a certain times. The employees need to master these skills in 2 weeks only. It cannot be more than that because they have to do the work the week after that, things like that. So what do you think about that? What's your experience on that, or your suggestion that we can do?
Well, we all have our delivery deadlines, definitely. But there's so much that can be done in terms of organizing your work processes, organizing your teams in a way that people do not fall sick because they are too stressed. So in a way, it's all about planning. It's about being flexible, as you said, looking at individual needs of people, and looking at also you allow for errors. I was quoting those universal design principles at the beginning, so we have tolerance for error.
Right.
And it's also very important to remind us all that any mistake we commit is not just a problem, it's an opportunity to learn and to get it better next time.
Yes, I agree with you on that. So we need to continually review, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. That's lifelong. That's part of lifelong learning, no? We review our own achievements, but also our team achievements. And we can also challenge deadlines,
That's interesting.
And we can measure productivity in many different ways as well. So, let's try to be creative as well.
Okay, that's
successful.
So, how does technology can accommodate the inclusive and collaborative learning? So it's not only inclusive, but even collaborative for learners with and without disabilities.
Well, we are now having a collaborative session now, and we are thousands of miles apart. So already that's a very nice demonstration of how technology can bring people together and have them exchange. So, and it's very important to create these spaces in learnings and use technology for that. But you can also introduce technology together and let people explore certain new technologies. And we're now seeing this massive development of artificial intelligence tools. So for them to affect and be useful to our daily work, it's important to explore them together as well, and to find out from your colleague, oh, how have you used this and how have you used that? And was this useful to you? And then again, talking to a person with disabilities, can you access that? What is needed for you to make most use of it? So there's a lot of collaborative technologies you can use, and there's a lot of collaborative methods you can use to explore and to maximize the benefit of technology.
And it seems that those assistive technologies are actually helpful not only for people with disabilities, but also for people without disabilities, right?
Definitely.
Okay, right. So if I may summarize a bit of what we've discussed by far, and correct me if I'm wrong. So it seems that it's important for us to change our mindset from seeing disability as disability itself, but more of what barriers, what challenges that people might have, and identify them, be open, beware, do not assume, and then assess and review your assessment, because you might not be inclusive enough, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really about not looking at the impairment as a problem, but looking at your own system and your own environment as being the one that's posing a problem. It's not the person's problem, it's the system's problem. And hence the system needs to adapt and needs to change. And we're all part of the system. So we all need to change to create an inclusive environment.
Okay. We have one last question from audience joining from our YouTube channel. Artificial intelligence has proven to be beneficial and potentially can be a big part of education. I think it has been quite a part of education nowadays. How can AI contribute to and enhance the learning experience for people with disabilities?
If the AI tools we're using are accessible, they can be just as beneficial to everyone. So they need to be made accessible. I mean, a chatbot online, I think now the latest that ChatGPT is now offering is that the chatbot is also able to talk to you. So for people needing a screen reader or an auditive methods, this will be the next new support and the next new revolution for AI. But we also have little AI things in so many tools already where we might not even be aware that this is AI and that this is learning from us. I mean, be alone the all our personal imprints we leave on the internet when we click on something, because there's a machine behind that's already learning and using that knowledge to then prompt you with other things. So in a way, as long as the AI we're using is accessible, can be used by people with different types of disabilities, it will revolutionize all our lives and the way we learn together.
I believe so. And there might be more advancement coming from the AI that can provide more inclusivity for people with disabilities as well. Maybe they can actually start to identify instead of us identifying each other's. I don't know, it's just a possibility. We're coming towards the end, and there's one last question from a member of our audience. I'm delighted that we've been able to address all the questions. Questions coming from Dwi Rahmawati. Can we provide training that's combined participant with and without disabilities? And based on your working experience with the ILO, what are the best practices that you observe from other countries that we can do in Indonesia?
Well, this is what inclusive learning is all about. Inclusive learning means you mix groups. You make your learning inclusive so that everyone, no matter whether they have a disability or they do not have a disability, can learn together and from each other. And it's the breaking barrier in your head that this is a different person. Well, we're all different, you know, but we all have our issues and our strengths and our weaknesses. People with disabilities have some impairments, but in a way, they have so many strengths and capabilities, just like any other person. And so if you come with that mindset, you will very easily discover that it's not very difficult and that you will have a lot of additional learnings as well jointly, because you might have overlooked barriers, issues, and also solutions that people with disabilities might have found that you were not even aware of existed.
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Christine, for answering that. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our session today, but I'd like to invite Christine to share concluding messages on inclusive learning.
Thank you very much. I think I've already given so many messages. The key one is really to enjoy learning together. Do not put any barriers in your thinking. And if you see that someone else faces a barrier, talk to the person. Find a solution together, and you will enjoy inclusive learning as a much more as a much better and a much more enjoyable learning experience for everyone.
I'm sure it will be an enriching experience. Again, thank you very much, Christine, for being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a big hand to Christine. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that's the end of today's session. Thank you for joining us and for actively participating in our sessions by asking your questions. Thank you for all the questioners coming in. Please remember to leave your feedback through the link shared in the chat box. And again, thank you for being with us today. We still have one more day of the MOF Learning Week tomorrow. But for now, I'd like to give the screen back to Yudi. Thank you. Back to you, Yudi.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again give a round virtual applause for our speaker today, Christine Hoffman, for the insightful session. So many things to learn today. And also Lily Mutiari for being our awesome moderator. And of course, for all the participants who have contributed with engaging questions and discussions. What a great sessions we had today. And hopefully this webinar can enlighten us and bring us to new perspectives, new possibilities, and new opportunities. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that we've come towards the end of this webinar. Once again, my sincere appreciation to each and every one of you for being a part of this virtual gathering. Before we part ways, a kind reminder to give your feedback about this webinar by filling out the evaluation form via the link that we've shared on the chat box. So, see you tomorrow on Kemenkeu Learning Week Day 4 with another captivating topic of metacognition and the speaker Michael Morris, a chaired professor at Columbia Business School. I'm Yudi Dwi Prasanto, signing off. Have a great time ahead, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.